On today's video, we're talking all about camera settings, specifically for my Olympus setup. So this video is not going to be a technical video going through all of the settings that are on this Olympus camera. If you want to see something like that, head over to the OM Systems YouTube channel. They've got plenty of technical videos over there. If you don't own an OM Systems camera, then check out the YouTube channel for your specific camera manufacturer. For this video, all I'm going to cover is the settings I use for my macro photography. So the first thing I want to do is on the dial, I'm going to go over to M. On this camera, we have 3 custom settings that we can assign, as well as using the M, which is the manual mode. When you set up your camera with the manual mode, the camera remembers your settings. So technically, it's kind of like having a 4th custom function. First thing I'm going to do is switch my camera to M, and then I'm going to go into the menu. This camera was second-hand when I bought it. The first thing I did was to reset the settings and make sure that the firmware was up to date. Once I've done that, all I want to do then is I want to come in and find the time and date settings. Make sure that is set up, make sure it's set to English. Once I've done that, I will come in here then and change the copyright information for this camera, which I would set to Stuart Wood Photography. I haven't changed anything else, everything is set as standard, but there is some options you might want to look at too if you are doing macro photography. We have grid settings. You can set the grid. We can set the type of grid that we have. You can have your rule of thirds, squares, you can have a cross. I don't set that on my particular camera because I can see the rule of thirds just looking at an image now. But if you're not got that much experience, you might want to have a grid on there just to look at. Below there, we have the peaking settings. So you've got peaking color, I use red. Highlight intensity is normal. Image brightness adjustment is off. And to be honest with you, that is basically all I set up in the back end of the camera that is generic for all 4 settings that I use for macro photography. The first thing that I really want to set up is a setting for a single shot macro photography. Let's go and set that up now. For my macro photography, I have 2 different types of settings. I have one for a single shot, and I have a second setup for focus bracketing. Let's talk about the single shot first, and then we'll talk about focus bracketing afterwards. So while I'm still in my manual setting, there are some go-to settings that I use no matter what type of macro photography I'm doing, and those are the ones I'm going to program into my manual mode. That way, when I get to a new scene or have a new location, I have the out of my box settings that I then will adjust if necessary to get the correct exposure. Those settings are 1/200th of a second. Again, I am a flash user. If you're using natural light, then you will adjust your shutter speed accordingly to your scene. I will use an f10 and have an ISO of 200. That is the base ISO of this particular camera that I'm using now. This is the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. There are a couple more settings that I like to adjust simply because I am a flash user. I like to set my white balance to flash. Now it's not particularly necessary as to which setting you use, so long as it's a dedicated setting that does not change. You do not want to be using auto white balance for your macro photography, because if we go and do a quick stack manually, that auto white balance may change between the different shots, and that's something you don't want. So for me, I generally stick to a white balance that is set to flash. However, whenever I'm using a Cygnus Tech diffuser, I always set my white balance to 4800 as per their instructions. So long as the white balance doesn't change, I'm okay. That is my manual setting. That is what the camera is set to. Every time I get it out the bag, that's what it's set to. Those are the settings I start with. And again, I will adjust those settings depending on the situation. If it's too dark, I will either put my flash power up or put my ISO up, or if I want to go for a more dreamy look, I will lower my f-stop to get more out of focus. Those are my settings for a single shot. Now let's talk about focus bracketing and focus stacking. And before we talk about the actual settings that I use for the focus stacking, focus bracketing and assigning a custom function, we want to change a couple of buttons to allow us to quickly access some features. When we're doing macro photography, time is key. You haven't got much time between shots before an insect moves, so we want to set up our camera so that we have the maximum functionality and we can access these features really quickly. The first thing we want to do is we want to set some custom buttons for autofocus and turning our bracketing on and off. So what we want to do is you want to come into the menu and come to the B menu and then click on button function. And what you want to do is find the button that you want to assign, and this is completely up to you. It's completely up to you which button you assign. For me, I'm using this function 1 button at the back, and I've assigned that to manual or autofocus. So with one click of that button, I can turn on my autofocus. Next is my function 2 button. Again, it's in the same menu area, and I've assigned that to turning the bracketing on and off. So with one click of a button, I can go from a single shot to focus bracketing. So that has been done, and that's our manual setup done. What we want to do now is talk about our custom functions. And what I use my custom functions for is different types of focus bracketing. Now, this camera is able to do auto focus stacking. I don't use that function myself. I mostly use just the focus bracketing because I prefer to take more than 15 images of a subject. It's just better for me personally later on in the editing. Again, that's all down to you. And of course, you can adjust this method to suit your needs. So first of all, I'm going to come into my menu, into the camera 2 menu. We're going to go to bracketing. I'm going to turn that on. Go all the way down to the bottom, you will find focus bracketing. We will turn that on. Turn the focus stacking off because we want to set it up for focus bracketing. Number of shots. Now for the number of shots on this, I set it to 100. Focus differential, we're going to set that to 1. That's the narrowest movement there is between shots. And charge time, I set that to 0. If you've got a slower flash, you might want to play with the charge time so that your flash can recycle. So now we have our camera set up for focus bracketing. And there's a few more things we need to do before we can set our custom function. First of all, we need to turn on our flash so that the camera knows there's a flash attached, and it will reduce our shutter speed to 1/50th. We want to then set our aperture to the sharpest one for the lens. I'm currently using the Olympus 60mm macro. On that lens, an f5.6 gives very good results. And you want to set your ISO again to 200, which is the native ISO. So I'm using a focus bracketing differential of 1. This is for the highest magnification. If I'm using a Raynox or anything like that, you need the smallest amount of steps between the shots. What we want to do now is come into our menu, come to the reset custom modes, and then we want to assign a custom mode, and I'm going to assign that mode to C1. So now quickly I can go from manual mode to my C1 for focus bracketing. Just with a twist of one little button, I can set my focus bracketing. Sometimes the focus bracketing doesn't turn on, so I'll just press my button for focus bracketing. However, the settings are all set up for focus bracketing right there. I haven't got to touch it. And what this does is the difference between your insect flying away and you getting an actual focus stacked shot. What I want to do now is I want to come back into my focus bracketing. I want to come to my set focus differential, and I'll set that to 2. I'll come back out the menu and I will assign that as C2. I will repeat these steps, setting the focus bracketing differential to 3 and save that as a C3. So now I have my manual, which is for my single shot. I then have custom functions 1, 2 and 3 for stacking with different focus stacking differentials. I would use again C1 for the highest magnification for the most detail I want with the smallest subject, and I would use C3 if I have a larger subject that needs less shots for a stack. Now that we have that set up, I can now press my shutter button to begin a stacking process, and once I've got enough images for my image, I can press the shutter button again to cancel it. That is how I have set up my Olympus system for my macro photography. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, or again, you can email me or send me some questions over on Instagram if you wish to. But for now, I shall leave this video here. My name's Stuart Wood. I'll see you on the next one. Test, test, test. It's working. And of course, as soon as I press record, a plane comes over. So now, we've got to wait for that to go over. Hey? I've got a better idea. How about we just go straight to Stafford, because Numpty here's left his SD card at home and I can't do nothing. On today's video, we're talking all about camera settings. So what, you turn around because you're putting me off.
I concentrate.
Trying to, but she's here. Can we stand over there? That's it, stay there and just look that way. Don't look at me, look at the other way. Go on, turn around, that's better. Thank you for sticking to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, then please subscribe and click the like button. It really does help out the channel. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for their continued support in supporting me and this channel. If you're interested in joining Patreon, then check in the description below this video for a link to Patreon. If you want to continue watching my macro journey, then click one of the videos in front of you now.